The night air was crisp and quiet as Officer James Carter cruised through the city streets in his patrol car. The glow of streetlights reflected off the wet asphalt from an earlier rain, creating long streaks of light that seemed almost hypnotic. Carter had been on the force for over 8 years, and in that time he had developed a reputation among his colleagues as someone who ran his beat with authority sometimes, too much authority. Tonight, like many nights, he was determined to assert that dominance. Carter's eyes scanned the streets, stopping at cars that lingered too long at intersections, drivers who seemed nervous or fidgety, and anyone who, in his judgment, appeared out of place. A slight smirk played across his face as he muttered under his breath, "You never know what you're going to catch at this hour." His tone carried a mix of confidence and arrogance. To him, the night was his domain, and he was the law. Passing through a mostly deserted stretch, Carter's attention was drawn to a black sedan slowly navigating the street. He studied the driver through the reflection of his rearview mirror, a man in his mid-30s, calm, with a composed expression that didn't match the nervous energy of most late-night drivers. Something about him seemed ordinary enough, yet Carter's instincts, honed by years on the force, told him to take a closer look. "Better safe than sorry," he muttered, flicking on the patrol car's lights and signaling for the car to pull over. As the vehicle slowed and stopped at the curb, Carter's mind raced with assumptions. He had done hundreds of traffic stops, but he liked to think of himself as someone who could spot a problem before it happened. Tonight, he saw a potential challenge, or at least, that's what he told himself. While walking up to the driver's window, Carter adjusted his utility belt, his hand resting lightly on it as a reminder of his authority. He noticed the calmness of the man behind the wheel, almost unnerving in contrast to the officer's own growing sense of control. Carter leaned slightly forward, speaking through the rolled-down window. "Evening, sir. Do you know why I stopped you?" His tone was firm, carrying the weight of someone who expected immediate compliance. The man nodded politely but did not answer directly. His eyes met Carter's with quiet confidence, a subtle defiance that the officer wasn't used to seeing. Carter felt a twinge of irritation. Most people cowered under the weight of authority. This man did not. Yet he brushed it off, focusing instead on the paperwork and the minor infraction he believed he had spotted. In the patrol car, the city hummed quietly. From the outside, it seemed like a routine night, another ordinary patrol. But for Carter, tonight would be different. Something about this stop, this calm and measured driver, would begin to unravel the careful balance of power he had relied on for years. The night was just beginning, and neither man could have guessed how far this encounter would go. The black sedan had come to a complete stop at the curb, its tires crunching slightly against the gravel. Inside, Marcus Ellis adjusted his seat, his hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. He had been driving home from a long day at work, tired but alert, and he was accustomed to maintaining composure in stressful situations. He noticed the patrol car pull up behind him and the flashing lights reflected off his rearview mirror. Marcus exhaled slowly and waited. He knew the routine: stay calm, comply, and avoid giving the officer any reason to escalate the situation. Officer James Carter approached the driver's side window, his boots clicking against the asphalt. He kept his hand near his utility belt, a subtle reminder of the authority he wielded. "Evening," Carter said, his voice firm but casual, masking the suspicion he felt. "Do you know why I stopped you?" Marcus met Carter's gaze steadily. His calm, measured presence seemed to unsettle the officer slightly. "Good evening, officer," Marcus replied evenly. "I'm not entirely sure, but I'll cooperate. Could you clarify?" His tone was polite but confident, carrying an air of quiet authority that didn't go unnoticed. Carter's eyes narrowed slightly. Most drivers offered vague excuses or became nervous when confronted. This man didn't. Instead, Marcus's demeanor was almost too controlled, too composed. It made Carter's instincts flare. He felt challenged, though he refused to show it. "You were going a little over the speed limit back there," he said, leaning closer to the window. "I also noticed you didn't signal when you turned onto this street. Standard traffic violations." Marcus nodded slowly. "I see. I apologize if I missed a signal. I wasn't aware of my speed, but I'll make sure to be more careful." His calm acknowledgement, without any defensive tone, seemed to frustrate Carter. There was no fluster, No stammering, no hesitation, just measured words that implied Marcus was confident, composed, and fully aware of his surroundings. Carter decided to escalate. "I'm going to need to see your license and registration," he said, his tone sharper now. Marcus handed them over without hesitation. As Carter examined the documents, he noticed that everything was in order. Clean record, valid license, and up-to-date registration. His frustration grew internally, but he maintained a neutral expression outwardly. For a moment, silence hung between them. Marcus's calm, measured breathing and unwavering eye contact unnerved Carter more than any words could. In that pause, a subtle psychological tension built the officer's confidence versus the driver's composed authority. Carter's mind raced. How to assert dominance in a situation where he felt subtly undermined without any real cause. "Step out of the vehicle," Carter said abruptly, almost testing the waters. Marcus complied immediately, hands visible, calm, and deliberate. The officer's patrol car lights flashed over the scene, illuminating the night, marking the beginning of a confrontation that neither man yet fully understood. The encounter, which began as a routine traffic stop, was now a stage for an inevitable clash of authority and composure. Marcus remained calm, calculating, and ready, while Carter's sense of control, already fragile in the face of such poise, was beginning to crack ever so slightly. The night was only getting started. The night air felt heavier now, charged with tension. Officer James Carter stood beside Marcus Ellis, his flashlight cutting sharp lines across the black sedan. The calm composure of the man in front of him gnawed at Carter's confidence. He had dealt with hundreds of drivers over the years, and almost all had displayed nervousness or deference. Marcus's unwavering demeanor made Carter uneasy in a way he hadn't felt in years. "I'm going to search your vehicle," Carter announced, his voice firmer this time. "I have reasonable suspicion." The words hung in the air, the legal justification feeling more like a shield for his growing frustration than a necessity. Marcus nodded politely, hands still visible, and stepped back slightly to give Carter room. Marcus's calmness was unnerving. "Officer, may I ask what you're specifically looking for?" he inquired softly. His tone wasn't confrontational, but it carried an authority that made Carter hesitate for a brief second. That pause was all Marcus needed, to subtly assert control without raising his voice. "Suspicious behavior," Carter muttered, trying to mask the irritation creeping into his words. He moved around the car, peering into the windows, flashlight sweeping over the interior. Everything was ordinary. The car was clean, organized, and unremarkable. Carter's mind raced. He needed to find something, anything, to justify this stop in his own eyes. Marcus remained calm, observing Carter's movements. He subtly measured the officer's body language, noting the growing tension and the way Carter's shoulders stiffened as he found nothing amiss. It was a delicate psychological dance, Carter asserting authority physically, Marcus asserting authority through composure. "Open the trunk," Carter ordered, his tone harder now. Marcus complied without hesitation, the trunk revealing nothing unusual, just a neatly packed gym bag and a few personal items. Carter's frustration was mounting, but outwardly he maintained his posture, forcing himself to appear in control. "You're cooperating well," Carter said, his words laced with subtle sarcasm. Most people would have panicked by now. Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded politely. "I believe in following instructions, officer. It helps things go smoothly for everyone." The calm rationality of his response struck Carter like a challenge, though unspoken. As Carter closed the trunk, he made a split-second decision, one he would later regret. "I'm placing you under arrest for resisting and obstructing," he barked, his hand reaching for the cuffs. Marcus raised an eyebrow, almost imperceptibly, but did not resist. His hands went behind his back willingly, and the click of the handcuffs echoed sharply in the quiet night. Backup lights flashed as Carter called for assistance, overcompensating for the uncertainty creeping into his confidence. Every motion Marcus made was deliberate, measured, and calm, sending a subtle message. He was in control, despite appearances. Carter, blinded by ego and prejudice, failed to see the warning signs, the quiet authority, the knowledge of procedure, the unflinching calm. The stage was set. What began as a routine traffic stop had escalated into an arrest. But the real story, the one neither man fully understood yet, was only beginning to unfold. A quiet tension lingered in the night, hinting that this encounter would soon spiral far beyond the street where it started. The handcuffs clicked shut around Marcus Ellis's wrists, cold metal biting into his skin, but he felt nothing but calm. He had been in situations like this before, not personally, but professionally. His training had taught him to remain composed, to observe, to calculate, and to never let fear dictate his actions. Meanwhile, Officer James Carter felt a surge of satisfaction, a fleeting sense of victory. To him, the arrest validated his authority, reaffirmed his instincts, and, in his mind, justified every assumption he had made. "Stay calm, and keep your hands where I can see them." Carter barked, gesturing toward the patrol car. His tone was harsh, laced with condescension. He was convinced he had complete control of the situation, yet something about Marcus's stillness unnerved him. The man's steady gaze and unshaken posture made it clear that he was far from ordinary. Carter tried to ignore it, focusing instead on reading Marcus's demeanor as if he could uncover some hidden weakness. Marcus stepped toward the patrol car without hesitation. Every movement was deliberate, almost rehearsed, conveying respect without submission. Carter opened the back door and ushered him inside, maintaining a strict hold on protocol. The flashing lights outside reflected off the leather seats and Marcus's composed expression, creating a surreal tension in the vehicle's interior. It was a clash of confidence versus arrogance, control versus illusion of control. "You're going to come with me to the precinct. We'll sort this out," Carter said, his voice attempting casual authority, though his grip on the situation was beginning to feel tenuous. Marcus nodded calmly, saying nothing, letting the silence speak for him. That quiet defiance grated on Carter, whose ego was used to compliance, fear and hesitation not measured, silent confidence. On the ride to the precinct, Carter's mind raced. He justified his actions, mentally reviewing the minor traffic infractions, the slight hesitation in Marcus's responses, the calm composure that bordered on arrogance. He was convinced that the man was trying to manipulate him, to appear calm while secretly planning some clever escape or defiance. Marcus, meanwhile, sat back, relaxed yet vigilant, eyes scanning the interior of the patrol car and observing Carter's subtle tension. He understood the psychological power of patience, of controlled presence, and he wielded it effortlessly. By the time they reached the station, Carter's overconfidence had shifted into a quiet unease. He guided Marcus through the holding area, noting the glances of other officers who couldn't help but notice Marcus's composed demeanor. Carter felt his authority slipping, though he refused to admit it, and he doubled down, asserting control verbally and physically wherever he could. "Sit here," Carter commanded, pointing to the bench in the holding area. Marcus obeyed without argument, the handcuffs still on his wrists. He made no sudden movements, no unnecessary conversation, and no complaints. The calmness he exuded, the silent authority, subtly unsettled the officers around him and, most importantly, the man who had thought he had complete control. Officer James Carter. At that moment, the arrest that had seemed routine on the street had transformed into a psychological chess game. Carter believed he had captured the upper hand, but the quiet intelligence and unwavering calm of Marcus Ellis hinted that the real confrontation had only just begun. The night and its hidden truths were far from over. The fluorescent lights of the precinct flickered intermittently, casting harsh shadows across the sterile walls of the holding area. Officer James Carter led Marcus Ellis toward the booking desk, his hand on Marcus's arm, trying to assert control over the situation. The clicks of the handcuffs echoed against the tile floor, a subtle reminder of the authority Carter thought he wielded. But Marcus remained calm, each step measured, his posture straight, his gaze steady. "Name, date of birth, and reason for arrest," Carter barked, slamming the files onto the counter. He expected Marcus to flinch, to hesitate, to show some sign of submission. Instead, Marcus replied evenly, his voice calm and polite. "Marcus Ellis, July 12th, 1985. As for the reason, I understand it is an alleged traffic violation and resisting arrest." His articulation was precise, devoid of emotion but not devoid of authority. Carter's irritation grew under the weight of Marcus's composure. Most people, confronted with the same situation, would have faltered, given nervous excuses, or tried to argue in frustration. Marcus did none of that. He met every question with respect and clarity, subtly reminding Carter that while the handcuffs limited physical freedom, they could not dictate intelligence or confidence. As Carter began typing up the paperwork, he glanced at Marcus, trying to detect some flaw, some nervous tic, anything that could reinforce his sense of control. Marcus, however, only observed his surroundings, noting other officers, security cameras, and the layout of the station. Every glance, every subtle shift, demonstrated that he was not just a compliant detainee. He was aware, calculating, and in complete command of his composure. "You're awfully calm for someone under arrest," Carter remarked, leaning slightly closer, as if proximity could intimidate. Marcus met his gaze without a flicker of fear. "I find that maintaining composure makes interactions more efficient for everyone involved, officer," he said. The subtle confidence in his response made Carter flinch inwardly, though outwardly he forced a neutral expression. Other officers in the room took note. Whispers floated quietly across the station. "Who is this guy?" Their curiosity grew as Marcus answered questions flawlessly, knowing exactly when to remain silent and when to assert authority through clarity. Carter felt a growing sense of unease. This wasn't just a man following instructions. This was someone trained to handle authority, to navigate power dynamics effortlessly. Carter's hubris began to crack. He tried again, pressing Marcus on minor procedural details, hoping to provoke frustration or error. Marcus answered each question with the same calm precision, never raising his voice, never hesitating, never faltering. The psychological pressure now shifted subtly. Marcus, though in handcuffs, had begun controlling the narrative in the room through his demeanor and knowledge of the law. By the time booking concluded, Carter felt the first pangs of doubt. He had arrested this man expecting compliance, fear, and weakness, but what he got was patience, poise, and quiet authority. Marcus sat on the bench, relaxed but alert, a silent signal that the real challenge, the unraveling of Carter's overconfidence, was only beginning. The precinct was alive with the quiet hum of fluorescent lights, distant chatter, and the occasional clang of metal from the holding area. Marcus Ellis sat on the bench, his wrists still cuffed, but his posture remained erect, composed, and unshakable. Every movement was deliberate, his eyes scanning the room, his ears attuned to every conversation, and his mind calculating the dynamics of the environment. To any casual observer, he appeared calm, but anyone with experience could sense the subtle command in his presence. Officer James Carter returned to his desk, attempting to reassert authority through paperwork and procedural routine. He typed up the arrest report mechanically, yet every now and then he glanced at Marcus, who continued to sit quietly, occasionally adjusting his cuffs or shifting slightly without any sign of discomfort. The officer's ego bristled. Most detainees would fidget, complain, or plead. Marcus did none of these things. As other officers walked past, Marcus's subtle familiarity with legal and procedural terms became apparent. When an officer called out to him, asking a procedural question about identification and booking forms, Marcus answered immediately, clearly aware of what was expected, using correct terminology and even clarifying points when necessary. The language was precise, professional, too precise for a typical civilian. Carter caught snippets of the conversation and stiffened. Something about Marcus's tone, the way he referenced protocols, hinted at experience beyond an ordinary driver. Carter tried to shake it off, blaming nerves and overthinking. But Marcus's quiet confidence made it impossible. There was no arrogance in his voice, no attempt to dominate, just quiet competence. Even when Carter moved around the room, inspecting forms or checking on minor procedural details, Marcus's calm observation suggested that he understood exactly what was happening, and more importantly, what powers and authority lay beyond the officer's comprehension. The tension escalated when a junior officer approached with questions about evidence collection, unsure how to proceed in Marcus's presence. Marcus responded with clarity, offering guidance without overtly asserting dominance. It was subtle, almost invisible to someone not paying close attention, but the effect was undeniable. Marcus had shifted the atmosphere from one of routine authority to one of quiet scrutiny. Carter's face betrayed a flicker of unease. He tried to maintain composure, but the cracks in his confidence were beginning to show. Even the body cameras and security footage seemed irrelevant to Marcus. He knew that compliance alone was not enough to fully leverage authority. Understanding the rules, procedure, and psychology was what gave him power. Carter, focused on paperwork and his own assumptions, failed to recognize the signals. Marcus was not just cooperative. He was experienced, calculated, and in control of the narrative. By the end of the hour, subtle hints about Marcus's true role had begun to surface. His knowledge, demeanor, and unwavering calm were puzzle pieces that did not fit the profile Carter had assumed. The officer's arrogance had blinded him to these cues, yet the audience or anyone observing could sense the foreshadowing. Marcus Ellis was no ordinary civilian. The night's tension had shifted from a simple traffic stop to a psychological game of authority, and the stage was being set for the inevitable reveal. The precinct was buzzing quietly with activity, but Officer James Carter felt a growing tension that he couldn't fully explain. Marcus Ellis sat calmly on the bench, his hands cuffed but his posture perfect, radiating an authority that unsettled Carter with every passing moment. The man's quiet confidence had shifted the dynamic entirely. What Carter thought was a routine arrest was beginning to feel unpredictable. Carter's phone buzzed on the desk, and he picked it up to see a message from his supervisor, a routine check-in about the arrest. He had nothing to worry about, or so he thought, but as he glanced back at Marcus, a sense of unease crept in. Marcus's calm gaze seemed to follow him, silently analyzing every movement. Carter shook his head. He was the officer in charge. The night was under his control, or so he believed. Meanwhile, Marcus subtly observed the workflow of the precinct. He noted the officer's habits, the paperwork processes, and the body camera logs. Everything he saw told him exactly how the station operated and where vulnerabilities might lie. He didn't need to speak. His quiet observation was enough to unsettle those around him. Even junior officers, unaware of who he truly was, found themselves following his lead in subtle ways, asking questions, double-checking procedures, and seeking guidance, all without Marcus lifting a finger to assert authority. Carter, increasingly frustrated by his own growing doubt, tried to regain dominance. He moved Marcus to another holding cell while continuing the procedural checks. "Sit here. Don't move," he barked, attempting to re-establish control. Marcus complied instantly, hands visible and shoulders squared. But his calm, measured breathing and careful attention to Carter's behavior made it clear that he understood more than Carter assumed. Marcus wasn't just compliant. He was in command of the situation, at least psychologically. The tension grew further when Carter noticed Marcus subtly correcting a junior officer on documentation terminology. Normally, minor procedural errors would have gone unnoticed, but Marcus's precision drew attention. Carter felt a pang of unease. This was no ordinary civilian. The man's knowledge, confidence, and unshakable calm hinted at experience and authority far beyond what Carter could comprehend. As the night wore on, Marcus remained composed, while Carter grew increasingly tense. Every interaction, every question, and every procedural correction Marcus offered highlighted the contrast between a man who understood the system and an officer who believed he controlled it. Carter's overconfidence, once unshakable, began to crack under the weight of subtle hints and precise observations. By the end of the night, the precinct had become a chessboard, with Marcus calmly maneuvering pieces without ever speaking. Carter's moves were predictable. Marcus's responses were deliberate. The first cracks in the officer's arrogance had begun to appear, setting the stage for the reveal that would completely upend the balance of power. The investigation was no longer about a minor traffic infraction. It was about authority, perception, and the consequences of underestimating someone who knew the system inside and out. The precinct hummed with the low murmur of activity, phones ringing intermittently, officers moving between desks, and the occasional clatter of metal from the holding cells. Amidst this routine chaos, Officer James Carter felt an unfamiliar tension gnawing at him. His arrest of Marcus Ellis had seemed straightforward at first, a routine procedure following what he considered minor traffic infractions and procedural noncompliance. Yet, the calm, controlled demeanor of Marcus had subtly undermined his confidence, and now that feeling was intensifying. Carter's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from the station supervisor, requesting a report and updates on the situation. He answered curtly, suppressing the rising frustration in his chest. Everything was under control, or at least that's what he wanted to believe. But as he looked over his shoulder, Marcus's quiet vigilance was impossible to ignore. The man's observant gaze swept the room, taking in every detail, every officer, every procedural nuance, as if he were cataloguing the entire precinct. Carter's sense of authority was slipping, unnoticed by the other officers, but painfully clear to him. The first ripple of external intervention came when a junior officer hesitated with the paperwork. Marcus, still seated calmly, spoke up not to dominate, but to clarify and guide. The forms need to reflect the proper timing of the stop and booking, otherwise it could be challenged later, he said, his tone calm yet precise. The officer blinked, momentarily confused by Marcus's authority, then nodded and corrected the paperwork. Carter's jaw tightened. The subtle shift in the room's energy was undeniable. Marcus's presence and knowledge had begun to influence others. Meanwhile, whispers began circulating among the officers. A few glanced curiously at Marcus, exchanging quiet speculation. "Who is this guy? He's way too composed," one muttered under his breath. Another added, "I've never seen someone handle this calmly, even with cuffs on." Carter caught snippets of these conversations and felt a spike of irritation. He tried to remind himself that Marcus was just a civilian, and that his authority as an officer remained absolute, but deep down doubt was creeping in. Carter's overconfidence made him double down, asserting control verbally and physically where he could. But every move seemed to backfire. Marcus's subtle cues, calm demeanor, precise language, and measured reactions kept the officer on edge. Even the supervisors, reviewing reports and logs, began sending brief inquiries to confirm procedural correctness. While Marcus said nothing, the inquiries indirectly highlighted the officer's missteps, adding pressure from outside the immediate situation. By the end of the shift, the precinct's energy had shifted entirely. Marcus's quiet authority, combined with subtle external oversight, had begun to unravel Carter's inflated sense of control. The officer, once confident and commanding, was now forced to question his assumptions and actions. The situation was no longer a simple traffic arrest. It had transformed into a high-stakes test of power, patience, and awareness. Unseen by Carter, Marcus's calm evaluation of the environment and understanding of procedural leverage meant that the stage was nearly set. The external pressure, the whispers, the inquiries, the junior officer's cautious compliance, was beginning to build toward the inevitable reveal. Carter remained unaware that the very man he had believed to be powerless was about to turn the tables entirely, exposing authority, arrogance, and abuse of power in a single, undeniable moment. The atmosphere in the precinct had shifted completely. Officer James Carter was tense, his earlier confidence replaced by a tight, uneasy rigidity. Every glance he cast toward Marcus Ellis seemed to betray his growing suspicion that something about this man didn't add up. The calm, composed demeanor that had unnerved him all night now carried an unspoken weight, an authority that Carter could not identify, yet instinctively feared. "All right," Marcus finally spoke, his voice quiet but measured, cutting through the low hum of activity in the precinct. "I think it's time to clarify a few things." He unbuckled his hands from the handcuffs, a single motion that carried both calm and command. Carter's eyes widened in disbelief. "How are you?" he began, but Marcus raised a finger, silencing him with the precision of someone used to controlling a room without raising their voice. "I am a DOJ investigator," Marcus said evenly, his tone authoritative, yet restrained. "I have jurisdiction over this precinct and the conduct of officers on duty. Every action tonight has been documented. Dashcam, bodycam, and station logs all confirm your procedural violations." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Carter's chest tightened, the magnitude of the revelation sinking in. He had arrested a man he thought powerless, only to find himself confronted with someone whose authority far exceeded his own. Around the room, whispers erupted. Officers who had observed Marcus's calm, precise demeanor finally understood what they had sensed all along. Junior officers exchanged stunned glances, while supervisors and peers quickly gathered, reviewing the documentation Marcus cited. Carter's face burned not just with embarrassment, but with the realization that his assumptions, biases, and misuse of authority had been exposed for all to see. Marcus stood, removing his coat and placing it neatly on the bench. "Officer Carter," he continued, maintaining a professional tone, "your conduct constitutes misuse of authority and procedural negligence. I will ensure the department follows through with a formal review." Every word was deliberate, measured, and undeniable. Carter opened his mouth to argue, to defend himself, but found no words sufficient to challenge the undeniable facts laid before him. For the first time all night, Carter felt powerless. The very man he had assumed was vulnerable now held control over his career, his credibility, and his professional reputation. The tables had turned completely, illustrating the consequences of arrogance and bias. Marcus, composed and unflinching, had executed a quiet, precise strategy: compliance paired with authority, patience paired with calculated observation. As officers began documenting the chain of events, Marcus offered no grandiose speech or condemnation. His calm presence alone carried the weight of accountability. Carter, humbled and exposed, finally understood the lesson: misuse of authority, especially when fueled by prejudice, always has consequences. The room's tension eased slightly, replaced by a sense of justice, quiet, undeniable, and absolute. By the end of the night, the revelation had reshaped the precinct's energy. Carter would face internal review and consequences, while Marcus Ellis, professional and dignified, left a clear impression: authority is not defined by force or intimidation, but by knowledge, composure, and the courage to uphold the law impartially. The story of the night, which began as a simple traffic stop, had become a lesson in accountability, respect, and the power of calm authority. The morning after the shocking reveal, Officer James Carter arrived at the precinct with a heavy sense of dread. The events of the previous night had left an indelible mark on his confidence. For the first time in his career, he faced scrutiny not just from supervisors but from someone whose authority exceeded his own: Marcus Ellis, the DOJ investigator who had exposed his misconduct. Every step Carter took echoed in the hallways of the precinct, a reminder that his misuse of authority would have lasting consequences. Back in the holding area, Marcus calmly gathered his belongings, checking the documentation to ensure the chain of evidence remained intact. He was meticulous, precise, and professional, a stark contrast to the tension that had consumed Carter. Though the handcuffs had long been removed, Marcus's composure had never wavered. His focus now shifted to ensuring that justice was served, not personal satisfaction. Carter's supervisor, Lieutenant Harper, called him into the office. The room was quiet, yet charged with expectation. "Carter," Harper began, holding a folder thick with reports. "I've reviewed the dashcam footage, body cam recordings, and the booking logs. Your actions last night are under formal review. Misuse of authority, procedural negligence, and harassment allegations are being documented." Carter's throat tightened. He opened his mouth to argue, to justify his actions, but the evidence was overwhelming. Every error, every lapse, every biased assumption had been recorded. Across the precinct, the atmosphere had shifted. Officers who had previously shrugged off the incident now observed Carter with a mix of curiosity and caution. The quiet murmurs highlighted an unspoken lesson: authority could not be wielded recklessly, and arrogance had consequences. Carter, once confident in his control, now understood the full weight of accountability. Marcus, meanwhile, remained professional and composed. He briefed Lieutenant Harper on the necessary procedural follow-ups, ensuring the investigation into Carter's conduct was thorough and impartial. There was no vindictiveness in his tone, only clarity and adherence to the law. The difference between power and authority had been made clear. True authority comes not from intimidation or aggression, but from knowledge, preparation, and calm enforcement of justice. Later that day, Carter found himself suspended pending the outcome of the DOJ review. The humiliation of the previous night lingered, but it was coupled with a clear understanding of his mistakes. He had underestimated Marcus Ellis, misjudged the situation, and allowed personal bias to dictate his actions. The lesson was harsh but unavoidable. Abusing power carries consequences, and those consequences are real and inescapable. Marcus, having completed his role, quietly left the precinct, a model of professionalism. His calm demeanor, precise execution and unwavering authority had not only exposed misconduct, but had also reinforced the importance of accountability in law enforcement. The events of the night remained a powerful reminder to all involved. Authority is a responsibility, not a privilege, and respect for procedure and fairness is paramount. By the end of the day, the precinct had returned to its routine, yet the memory of that night lingered. Officers would remember Marcus Ellis as the man who enforced justice without theatrics, and Carter would carry the lessons of arrogance, bias, and accountability for the rest of his career. The precinct had quieted down after the flurry of activity from the night before. Officer James Carter sat at his desk, staring blankly at the paperwork before him. The realization of his mistakes weighed heavily on him. The formal review, the investigations, and the whispers among his colleagues were constant reminders that arrogance and misuse of authority come with unavoidable consequences. He had thought he controlled the night, but in reality, he had been outmaneuvered not with force, but with patience, knowledge, and calm authority. Meanwhile, Marcus Ellis walked through the front doors of the precinct with measured steps, his coat draped neatly over his arm. He had completed the procedural checks and ensured that all documentation of the arrest, the dashcam footage, and the officers' testimonies were organized for a thorough review. Marcus's presence had shifted the energy of the precinct, instilling a sense of professionalism and accountability. Where tension had once reigned, now there was order and clarity. Carter's colleagues observed the scene quietly. Marcus's demeanor commanded respect without demanding it. There was no arrogance, no overbearing lecture, just calm, unwavering authority. It was a stark contrast to Carter's behavior, and a subtle reminder to everyone present of the difference between power and true authority. Junior officers, in particular, noticed the precision with which Marcus handled every detail, from procedural correctness to interpersonal interactions. They understood, without explicit instruction, the lesson he had imparted: professionalism and knowledge always outlast force and intimidation. As Marcus approached the exit, he paused briefly, surveying the room. His gaze met Carter's for a moment, calm, assessing, and authoritative, yet devoid of personal vindictiveness. It was a reminder that justice had been served, not through confrontation or aggression, but through meticulous adherence to procedure and quiet control. Carter looked back, humbled, realizing that the man he had underestimated had exposed not only procedural failures, but also the arrogance that had clouded his judgment. Walking out into the night, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility, not triumph. He had upheld the law, exposed misconduct, and ensured accountability, but he remained grounded. For him, this was routine, not heroics. The city's streets stretched ahead, quiet and dimly lit, and Marcus walked with purpose, each step a testament to discipline, preparation, and the steady exercise of authority. Back inside, Carter finally began reviewing the incident with a more reflective mindset. He acknowledged, for the first time, the need for humility, respect for procedure, and awareness of bias. The events of the night had become a pivotal lesson, one that would shape his career and interactions for years to come. The precinct, now quieter, felt like a place where respect for the law and for colleagues had been reinforced by the events of the night. By the end of the day, the story of the night, a routine traffic stop turned test of authority, had reached its resolution. Marcus Ellis had left a lasting impression that true power lies not in intimidation or force, but in calm, measured authority, knowledge, and unwavering adherence to justice. Officer Carter, along with everyone in the precinct, would carry the lessons forward, reminded that every action has consequences, and every misuse of authority can and will be exposed. The city had settled into its usual rhythm by dawn, the streets quiet under the soft glow of early morning light. For most, it was another day of routine, the hum of traffic, the distant chatter of pedestrians, and the occasional wail of a siren punctuating the calm. But for those who had witnessed the events of the previous night, most notably Officer James Carter and the precinct staff, the experience lingered like a lesson etched deeply into memory. Carter sat alone at his desk, reviewing reports and footage for what felt like the 100th time. Each replay highlighted not only his procedural mistakes, but also the subtle arrogance that had led him to underestimate Marcus Ellis. He had approached the situation believing he held absolute authority, yet every moment revealed a different reality. Authority is not defined by force, handcuffs, or flashing lights. It is earned through knowledge, composure, and fairness. The weight of that realization pressed heavily on him, leaving no room for excuses. Elsewhere, Marcus walked along the city streets, the night now giving way to morning light. His coat was neatly draped over his arm, his steps purposeful yet unhurried. He reflected on the night's events, the arrest, the subtle psychological dynamics, and the procedural oversights he had carefully documented. For him, this was not a personal victory. It was a fulfillment of duty. Justice was not about ego or retaliation. It was about accountability and ensuring that authority is exercised responsibly. The impact of the night extended far beyond the two men directly involved. Junior officers observed Marcus's calm, measured authority and began to reassess their own approach to the law and interactions with the public. Supervisors took note of the precision with which he handled every detail, recognizing that true authority required preparation, patience, and adherence to procedure rather than intimidation or impulsive action. Even Carter's peers, once indifferent to his behavior, now understood the consequences of arrogance and misuse of power. In the quiet moments of reflection, Marcus considered the broader implications. Abuses of power, however subtle or overt, have ripple effects throughout a system. When unchecked, they erode trust, undermine accountability, and compromise justice. The events of the night had illuminated this truth clearly. A single act of misuse could cascade into institutional failure, but when countered with knowledge, calm, and authority, accountability prevails. As the morning sun rose higher, the precinct slowly returned to routine, but the lesson remained. Carter, humbled and reflective, faced the consequences of his actions. The city, indifferent to the drama of the night, carried on. Yet the memory of Marcus Ellis, a man who exercised quiet authority and upheld justice, lingered for all who had witnessed the event. The story concluded not with fanfare, but with understanding. True power lies not in force, intimidation, or prejudice, but in knowledge, composure, and fairness. Marcus Ellis had left an indelible mark, a reminder that accountability is the foundation of authority, and justice, quiet, precise, and unwavering, always prevails.